Welcome to Good Burger Reviews. My name is John and I'm here to do a Halloween special presentation. And that special presentation is about the Halloween franchise. Now, I just did a Halloween franchise ranking, but this is a little bit different. We're going to be breaking down the timelines and breaking down the franchise in a different way so I can explain my thoughts to you guys on how the Halloween franchise has been on repeat for the last 47 years and what we can do or hope for in 2028 to break that cycle. So with no further ado, let's get into it. The way I break this down is this way. Every 10 years since 1978, Halloween comes back with either a new line of characters, a new order of things like erasing the past and starting over, or starting over part way, changing things or whatever, rebooting and all of that. But what I've noticed is every time Halloween comes back, it does the same thing. It breaks down into three categories of the way the franchise operates. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is that Halloween always starts off with its basic principle. Michael Myers escapes, comes to Haddonfield or wherever, and goes on a killing spree. So what does the cycle do around usually the sequel or the second entry that's usually always the same? And that is the addition of a grieving character or a character that's running around in a hospital. And it happens every time. You may not believe it or not remember that it does, but it does. In the third one, it usually goes off the rails in some format, meaning it kind of changes from that basic formula and veers off in a random direction. So part of what we're going to talk about is the 5 ways it veers off and which way it was the strongest and what they can do in 2028 to not veer off completely, but show Michael Myers in a new way, in a strong way, in a fun way that'll keep the fans entertained by somehow managing to paying homage to the old ways Michael Myers is, but also shedding light on new things so that we're not repeating the same old, same old. So I'll break it down to you this way. 1978, Michael Myers in Halloween 1 escapes out of Smith Groves Hospital and drives off and runs away to Haddonfield. He shows up in Haddonfield and he terrorizes the town by committing murders on the babysitters in that town. That's the basic premise of Halloween. That's it. Serial killer escapes a mental hospital and runs rampage on a town. Simple, right? So why does Halloween always try to complicate it and deepen its lore and change things? Because it seems like every time it changes things up, somehow it gets divisive. Now in 1981, Halloween 2, it's an addition to the same night. And where do we find Laurie Strode? In a hospital. This is another huge reoccurring theme and the second pinpoint of this discussion where the characters always seem to end up in a hospital. And to be frankly, for as much as I loved it in Halloween 2, I just mentioned this in my review of The Strangers Chapter 2, I'm kind of getting tired of serial killers running loose in a hospital. It's been done. And Halloween 2 did it great, I think. Now, in the first go-around, or in the first Halloween trilogy, where does Halloween go off the rails? Well, Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. At the time, it was seen as a disappointment. People showed up to the movie theater expecting to find Michael Myers in Halloween 3, and when he wasn't, it was seen as going in a different direction and what people didn't want. It became divisive. Now, over time, Halloween 3 has developed itself into its own cult classic, and people have come to accept it for what it is, because it was part of John Carpenter's original ideas for the Halloween franchise as being an anthology and not spending the whole franchise dealing with Michael Myers. Michael Myers was in essence only supposed to be chapter 1. John Carpenter resisted Halloween 2, but was all about Halloween 3. So let's flash forward to the 10 years later and the next timeline. Now this timeline is still connected with the original 2, Halloween 1 and 2. 3 is its own thing, and then 4 picks up where 2 left off. Michael Myers, we're back to the basic again. So in Halloween 4, what do we see? Michael Myers escaping and running off and going to Haddonfield and going on a killing spree. And if you think about it, Rachel was babysitting Jamie, so it was the same, all the same basics were there. You had the killer, you had the babysitter, you had the little kid, and you had the police as well. Back to basics, and whenever it seems like we go back to basics, that seems to be the strongest entry in that batch. So like of the first 3, Halloween 1 tends to be people's most favorite. When you think about the next 3, usually Halloween 4 is the most popular of 4, 5, and 6. Why? Most likely because it's focused on those basic concepts. So when we think about Halloween 5, the second one, that's the entry in the Thorn Cult universe, as we'll say, the Thorn Cult trilogy, does it really take that chapter 2 to a hospital? And yes, it does. If you think about it, in Halloween 5, where's Jamie Lloyd? Jamie Lloyd is in the children's hospital. She's suffering from grief because she experienced everything that happened in Halloween 4. She's muted, but here we are. We have a whole hospital scene again. You have nurses, you have Dr. Loomis is there, and it's the same thing. It's very similar in basic patterns of Halloween 2. It's directly following Halloween 4, just like Halloween 2 directly follows Halloween 1. And we're in a hospital setting, the children's hospital. And of course, in the Thorn Cult trilogy, where does it go off the rails? With the Thorn Cult. Now that gets entered in part 5 a little bit, but it really goes off the rails in part 6, where they really develop all the Thorn Cult things that go down. And this is like the deeper explanations of why Michael Myers was the way he was. What caused him to be a killer? What caused him to be, doing what he did every Halloween? So they wanted to develop the lore. Now I can tell you from being alive at the time when these movies were coming out, it was exciting. People liked it. People were like, oh, we're going to learn more about the killer. We're going to learn more about what's causing him. But when you look back at it, and when you review the franchise, going through the movies again, kind of knowing what's going on, all this XX explanation really is just taking away from the fear factor of Michael Myers. When you realize that Michael Myers is being driven by some bizarre cult, it's not as scary as just some random stranger showing up and going psycho on babysitters. So let's move on to the next cycle. Halloween H2O, the 20-year anniversary, 1998. What happens? Well, because Donald Pleasence in real life passed away, they wanted to continue with the franchise, and they thought the best thing to do would be to bring Jamie Lee Curtis back after she departed in Halloween 2. So what they had to do was kind of retract all the Thorn Curse stuff and just sequel off of part 2. Keeping Laurie Strode as Michael Myers' sister, which still at that time was seen as a good thing, and I thought it was a good thing, and the way it was played out in Halloween H2O, I still thought that sister element was a good thing then. Now, Halloween H2O, very much focused on the basics. It was a very simple, short movie. Michael Myers escapes. He escapes from pretty much Haddonfield or Smith Grove, wherever he's been hiding out the last 10 years or 20 years. And he finds Laurie Strode operating under a new name in California, Northern California, and she's like this head mistress of a school. She's like a principal of a school, and she has a son, John Tate, who's 17 years old. But overall, Halloween H2 was a very basic entry with just basic Michael Myers showing up and killing. And when you think about the H2O timeline, obviously H2O is the strongest in that timeline. Primarily because it really does go back to basics. Now, it didn't go back to Haddonfield. This is the one where they're not in Haddonfield. But honestly, at the time, it didn't seem like that big of a deal that he was in California, in Northern California, and the setting of the school was quite neat, and the characters were very derivative of Scream, being that it came out 2 or 3 years after Scream was released. And the success of Scream, Halloween 2 was kind of running on the fumes that Scream had started in the late 90s. But then we have Halloween Resurrection. And guess what? Where does Halloween Resurrection open up at? Jamie Lee Curtis is where? She's in a hospital. She's in a mental hospital. So here we go right away. Back to basics. Now a hospital. And of course, Halloween Resurrection is not well liked, and part of it is because of the whole hospital and the way Jamie Lee Curtis dies so early in that movie. And because of H2O, like them undoing what they did in H2O. H2O has a strong ending with, chopping his head off, and then boom, they want to undo that. So that really undermines H2O. Halloween Resurrection undermines H2O with doing all that, coming up with this whole idea that she accidentally killed an EMT. And then right away within Resurrection, what happens? It goes off the rails again. What's different this time? Well, you killed off Jamie Lee Curtis, so you don't have the sister thing going anymore. So now he's en route to his home. And what's going on in his home? Busta Rhymes and his crew of kids are filming like a live television airing, like back what was popular in the early 2000s of like live survival TV shows and found footage type of TV shows, and all that was going on. And this movie gave that feeling. But a lot of people don't like Halloween Resurrection because it kind of delves away from the basic. It gets into a thing that people weren't a big fan of. Now at the time, I liked the whole cameras in the house and that whole found footage, survival TV show, live action thing that they kind of were doing. But it doesn't age well. It kind of dates Halloween Resurrection. And when you look back at all of the way Michael Myers veers off and all the backstories they give him, this one wasn't that strong. And I think primarily because these characters weren't that strong. Now we flash forward to 10 years later. What happens? Well, 2008. Oh, no Halloween in 2008. But if you think about it, Rob Zombie had his almost 30-year anniversary movie in 2007 with his sequel in 2009. So it's right there, right at that anniversary time where Zombie takes over the Halloween franchise. And what does he do? He does exactly what they've already done. He goes back to basics. Halloween, his Halloween 1, 2007 Halloween, is a reboot of the original Halloween. Now, it's a little bit different because it reboots in the tail end of the movie, and in the beginning of that movie, it does go off the rails a little bit with the whole elaborate backstory of Michael Myers' childhood. And a lot that went on with the Myers family as a whole, and everything that was going down in Smith Grove and Dr. Loomis. And they show Michael Myers a lot as a child. Another thing that I just discussed in my review of The Strangers Chapter 2, of how flashing back to the childhood takes away from the scare and really causes us to sympathize with the killer instead of being afraid of him. Now, Halloween, that entry still was a very basic entry, especially that reboot part of Halloween. He escapes, he goes to Haddonfield, he attacks Laurie Strode just like he did in the original one. So it really is a back to basics edition. Halloween 2, 2009, very similar to Resurrection, where in the beginning, where do we start off? Oh yeah, Laurie Strode's in the hospital again. Now, I think by this point, Zombie must have known that the hospital thing was getting done and done and done, and he kind of shortened it, just like it was in Resurrection. It was just a shorter hospital stay. But you have Laurie Strode in a hospital, and it's a very crazy and wild and intense scene. But then we go into the tail half of Halloween 2, and what happens? Halloween 2, 2009 goes off the rails. How? They've changed Michael Myers a lot. One, he talks. The mask is different. He's different. But also the addition of Sherry Moon as his mother, who has been dead, that he had killed her, and she's coming back as a ghost. And this white horse business. They were bringing the white horse. And this wasn't received well by many of the Halloween fans. Again, showing that even in Rob Zombie's timeline, the Halloween franchise goes off the rails at the tail end by adding all this extra lore and extra chaos. Now, flash forwarding yet again, another 10 years. Here we are, rolling into 2018, and guess who's back? Halloween. Halloween's returned again under David Gordon Green's trilogy that we received starting in 2018, and they bring back Jamie Lee Curtis. And of course, that Halloween 1 goes back to basics. We have Michael Myers escaping, very similar as he did in the first one, in the fourth one, in a lot of them where he escapes, shows up on Haddonfield, and starts killing. Now, this one erased the whole sister lore, but we still had the back to basics feel. It was very back to basics where Michael Myers escapes, he shows up, and he kills. Very simple. Of course, he's killing. There's a babysitter in Halloween 2018 and a little kid and police officers. It's still that same very basic premise. But then what happens in Halloween Kills? Hospital. Again, 5th time around, we're in a hospital with Jamie Lee Curtis and Michael Myers in a hospital. Now, I will say in Halloween Kills, Michael Myers doesn't really show up in the hospital. But they do have that little riot scene where they think Michael Myers is in the hospital and they kill that other patient off the building and all that going on. But Jamie Lee Curtis spends Halloween Kills in the hospital. So we still have this hospital thing going on. And then, guess what? Halloween's going to go off the rails and Halloween ends. Of course it does. How? By entering Corey Cunningham, where they want to try and say that Corey Cunningham is going to kind of become consumed and become like Michael Myers and start doing kills like Michael Myers. Now, they had tried this before where they kind of alluded to the fact that back in the Thorn Course timeline that Jamie Lloyd might have been becoming like Michael Myers. And then they also alluded in Halloween 6 there was a little boy that they were luring into the Thorn cult that was going to become the next Michael Myers, and so forth. So they tried it before, but they didn't really delve into it. Now in this one they delve into it. And of course it was very divisive amongst the fans, and some people loved it, some people hated it. But again, in Halloween Ends, it's gone off the rails. Now here we are. All 5 timelines where it was the same thing. Basics, hospital, off the rails. So the real question is, what are they going to do in 2028 to break this cycle? Now I know they already have a video game, but the video game isn't really going to count because that's not going to have like a plot. That's not going to have a storyline. That's going to be a game where it's going to be based off the movies or maybe whatever movie they're trying to make to go along with it. So I'd really like to spitfire some ideas of what I think the next Halloween installment needs to do to excel past its prior installments. It'll never beat out the 1978 version, but it could be one that comes in second place a lot on a lot of people's future franchise rankings if they just slow down and they don't repeat the same mistakes or the same themes that they've been repeating in all the franchise's entries since. Well, I think about what's the first thing that needs to be prevalent. I definitely think they should go back to basics and keep the lore behind Michael Myers very simple. He escapes. We don't know the reason. He's going to show up somewhere and he's going to go on a killing spree. That's it. So what else do they need to do? I mean, that's what you do for Michael Myers. And you create great tension by following in the footsteps of John Carpenter, Alfred Hitchcock, where you have that tension of him showing up and there's a build up to the tension and a build up to the kills and maybe some original kills. Now that might be hard to do after 50 years of slashers, but I think it can be done. What else I think they need to do is when they go back to basics, let's get some new characters. Laurie Strode's been done to death. Dr. Loomis has even been done. He's been, no one's going to fill in those shoes of Donald Pleasence. So, I mean, I don't think they should really try. What I do think they should do is come up with different characters, and I can just spitfire my own idea of what I think would be a great addition to a Halloween, where it's kind of in that back to basic mode, but you have characters that are new and fresh. 2020 characters. 2028 or whenever they decide that they're going to release another movie. And one thing I think is the characters need to be smart and strong and well-developed characters, but so it's a slasher. They don't need to be like Shakespeare in Love characters, but they can be a little bit a step up from what we've seen in many of these slasher entries. When Scream came along, the characters seemed to get a little meta and a little smarter. So I like that aspect, but the meta thing has kind of been done and it's been done to death as well. So maybe smart, maybe not so much meta. Leave the meta to the Scream franchise. Also, I mentioned this in my Halloween ranking. In Halloween 6, they had an opportunity with a whole new batch of characters there where it was focused on a family. And Halloween really hasn't had that. It seems like in typical slashers, it's teenagers getting slashed and the adults are always, the adults and the cops are always dumb and off the rails with things. The teenagers seem to be the most on par with it. I always thought maybe if we had like the dynamic that was in Halloween 6, with an entire family, a mom, a dad, kids of different age brackets, so you have different type of characters that you can form, and they should be fun and smart characters that you relate to, characters that you want to see win, characters that you're going to root for. So maybe a little bit smart, maybe just a little bit funny, but definitely characters that can be sympathetic. And that's all in the writing of characters. But it also falls on the actors and actresses that play these characters well to emote these feelings so that we feel that when we're watching these characters. I think a lot may have to do with who they pick to play in the roles. I liked Josh Hartnett. I'd love to see him back, not as John Tate, but maybe Dad. Like Danielle Harris, she did great, and she came back as Annie Brackett after she played Jamie Lloyd. She is at the age where she could be the mom. And then, younger kids. you know, Jenna Ortega type characters. Now, maybe a little bit younger than her, because Jenna Ortega is really associated with Scream. But maybe someone maybe just a few years younger than her that has that same type of vibe, that same type of dynamic as one of the kids, maybe the oldest kid. And then you got younger kids that could be like Tommy Doyle's age. And you can play into all these characters of what they're doing. And one thing I think they should be doing is Halloween things. Sometimes I feel like in some of these entries, they don't, it's just Halloween and that's it. But they don't really play into the Halloween thing. You know, in the first one they were carving a pumpkin. They could be like that middle kid, maybe a 12-year-old kid. What could he be doing? Maybe he could be, you know, throwing toilet paper. You know, we haven't seen that in any of the Halloweens. Maybe trick-or-treating. Now, I know in some of the entries, some of the kids were trick-or-treating, or we see trick-or-treating off to the side, but they've never really done like a trick-or-treating kill, where kids are trick-or-treating and someone gets killed amongst all that, like right in it, something like that. I'm just spitfiring here of things that they can do that are different, but yet focus on the Halloween, the actual holiday, the Halloween holiday. You know, Michael Myers hasn't been to like a haunted house, or things that people do, or hayride, things that people do during Halloween. Again, just spitfiring. Now, you could come back and just do one movie, or you could do like David Gordon Green and do a trilogy. But if you're gonna do a trilogy, I think David Gordon Green's trilogy overall is fairly strong, but it has some weak elements, because I think the trilogy itself could have really been 2 movies based on what the material they had. And because they stretched it out among 3, it's where it gets weak, especially in that middle one, or even in the third one, Halloween Ends. But let me just spitfire here. You know, you have mom and dad, you have a teenage girl that's like 17, a teenage boy that's like 12, and then a little girl that's like 7. Now you have characters of all different ages that can kind of filter into those roles and do those types of things. And when they come back for the sequel, I don't think it should be the same night. Like, make Halloween 1 or the first installment be start to finish and complete, and then when the sequel comes back, it can be a couple years later. You know, kids, if you have kids in a franchise anyway, it's going to be obvious that they're aging. So if the next movie comes out, you know, 2 to 3 years later, you're going to see the kids age. So you can come back a couple years later, and some of the kids are older. Now that one that was 17 is now in college. Now that 12-year-old's in high school. Now that little girl's like almost 12, and everyone's kind of moving up the ranks, and you can have these characters evolving. But by the time you do a trilogy, that youngest one that maybe was 7 is now almost 15 or 17, depending on how long you take to release the trilogy. I don't think it should be back to back. Give people time to rest on it, enjoy the one that you released, and then wait a couple years. Even if it takes almost 10 years to do the next trilogy of movies, when you do it back to back, like Halloween Kills and Halloween Ends was like right away. It was like so quick. Just like Halloween 4 and 5 were back to back. You know, these back to back ones tend to be weak because they tend to be rushed. Don't rush it. Halloween is gonna have fans. If you throw that title on there, many people will come to see it. And if it's good, even more will come to see it, because word of mouth will spread quick. Okay, so I think I've gone on enough about this. All I can say is I hope you guys enjoyed this breakdown of the Halloween franchise. No matter what I've said about the Halloween franchise, I love the Halloween movies. I enjoy all of them to certain levels, as you heard in the ranking I had released earlier this month. And I'll tell you something else. Whatever they release, I'm going to be there day one to see it. Probably, hopefully still reviewing it. But maybe somewhere, somehow, someone in Hollywood could hear some of the little things I said if they think it's a good idea and inject those new ideas in. Just stay away from the hospital and stay away from developing unnecessary lore. And I think you can really go somewhere with the Halloween franchise. I'm super excited to see Michael Myers come back. And I hope you guys are too, as we're getting closer to Halloween. Don't forget to stay scared of those escaped serial killers that go on killing sprees on Halloween night and wear a white badge.